It is 475 BC China in the Zhou dynasty. Confucius has just died, leaving behind a new way of thinking about philosophy, morality, government, and family. Sun Tzu also died years earlier, but not before revolutionizing the art of war. Culture was at its peak, and life was good. Things weren't looking so good in the government, however, as China's central power, the Zhou, were steadily declining. The Zhou dynasty was a feudal society, which meant they left a lot of their power among different states across China. Over time, these states had more power than the central government, and while a part of the same China, no two states were really allied with each other, and each one was looking to spread their influence. And with new ways of waging war, every state set their sights on claiming China for themselves. These states would wage war on one another for over 200 years, ending the longest dynasty in Chinese history and making the first emperor of China. The Warring States period was essentially a big game to see who could get the most land and power, and these were the major contenders. But then Jin broke and became 3 different smaller states, so these were the real contenders. In the east, the state of Qi just had a problem with succession, and from it rose a man who would be known as King Wei of Qi. Qi would have a period of great success under his rule. They set out to reconquer Qi's lost territories from years before, launching a campaign against the neighboring states Zhao, Wei, and other smaller states, and were very successful, extending Qi's territory even further. The other states, seeing the Qi's overwhelming victory, said, "We don't want to end up like that, so let's not attack them for the next 20 years. At this time, the state of Qi had become extremely powerful, so powerful that the Lord Wei had started to call himself king. Further west, the kingdom of Wei was just defeated by Qin, who took a piece of land from them. Because of that, they moved their capital east to stay away from them. 10 years later, Wei wanted to take more land to make up for their devastating defeat by the Qin, so they attacked their neighbor in the north, the Zhao, and within a year they'd reached Zhao's capital. But then in the east, the Qi, who were now closer to Wei's new capital, took the opportunity to attack Wei while Wei was busy attacking Zhao, so Wei had to retreat and send troops back to defend their capital, stopping their campaign. This strategy was actually so successful it became known as one of the 36 stratagems, a book very similar to Sun Tzu's Art of War. The 36 stratagems was a book written by Sun Bin, the Qi general who led the attack against Wei. Coincidentally, Sun Bin was also Sun Tzu's great-great-great-grandson and would go on to write his own book with an original name called Art of War by Sun Bin. Not wanting to end on a losing streak, Wei attacks their other neighbor, Han, and Qi pulls up again with the same general and the same tactic of attacking Wei's capital. Sun Bin and his army quickly rushed in to attack Wei's capital, but they had a strategy. Knowing they were prepared a second time, they avoided a direct attack. Instead, they first pretended to surrender by acting like they were losing, which greatly boosted the enemy army's confidence. But once they let down their defenses, the Qi quickly turned on the overconfident Wei and defeated them swiftly at the Battle of Maling. Wei was now heavily weakened after multiple major defeats and seemed to be in the perfect shape for someone to invade. So Qin, having been eyeing Wei's territory for years, took this opportunity and obliterated the Wei, taking an even larger portion of their territory. And as a result, the states Qi and Qin had solidified themselves as the most powerful states in China. Down in the south, the state of Chu had been taking over many smaller states, while the major states had been waging war on one another. They brought these states into their already large territory and expanded south, further extending their territory. And at the peak of their conquest, their land reached as far south as modern-day Fujian. In 334 BC, another large state called Yue had gained a lot of power and had even planned to attack Qi, one of the most powerful states in China. But before they were able to launch their invasion, a diplomat from Qi visited Yue and said, "I think you should attack Chu instead. They're bigger and probably have more stuff." Okay. Yue then launched a full-scale attack at Chu, but greatly underestimated the enemy army and were quickly defeated and conquered. This victory brought Chu to the peak of their power in the Warring States period. The central government Zhou, quickly running out of influence, wanted to show that they still had some power left, so they appointed 3 rulers from Qin as representatives of their dynasty: Duke Xian, Duke Xiao, and Duke Hui. This move would ideally make the Qin officially under the Zhou, giving Zhou more security having such a powerful state backing them. The title of Duke meant that they were rulers of their own state, but they were still under the Zhou dynasty whose ruler held the title of king. Unfortunately for Zhou, after Hui was appointed as Duke, he changed his own title to King of Qin, which made the state of Qin independent from the Zhou dynasty. This declaration as a king of China caused a domino effect on the other states, with rulers of Han, Yan, and Zhao beginning to call themselves king as well. The central state of Zhou was now basically powerless and had split into East and West Zhou. With the ascension of a new king, the king would live in West Zhou while the East became yet another independent state. Towards the end of the early Warring States period, Qin had stretched their lands further west and conquered two large states in the south. Their sudden expansion gave the Chu fierce competition for being the biggest in China and also showed that their military prowess was no joke. This was all because of their philosophy of legalism. Legalism was a school of thought that had two main policies. The first was called fixing the standard. Laws in the warring states were constantly changing and mostly dependent on the ruler at the time. This was very vulnerable to corruption since it meant that whoever the ruler liked more would receive less punishment. Under legalism, the law was absolute. The same punishments were dealt for the same crimes and the same rewards for the same achievements, regardless of their social standing. This led to the next policy, equality before the law. Everyone received the same punishment or reward, no matter if they were a noble or a rice farmer. This also meant that people of lower status could rise in a social ladder by their achievements and not by birth. Because of this system, everyone in Qin wanted to join the military since that was the quickest way to make it big. Over time, their military began to have very skilled generals and soldiers and was easily able to defeat armies led by average nobles. By the end of the early Warring States period, Qin had become significantly more powerful than the other states and became known as China's superstate. This freaked out the other states, so they came up with two ways to handle this. These became known as the vertical and horizontal alliances. With the vertical alliance, the states in the center would ally with each other from north to south to keep the Qin in check, and with the horizontal alliance, a state would ally with Qin, allowing them to expand horizontally. One of the greatest supporters of the vertical alliance was Su Qin, a diplomat and philosopher. He was the first to successfully create a vertical alliance consisting of all of the other states to unite against the Qin. The alliance initially seemed like a success, and the Qin was actually at risk of disappearing off the map. But every state had their own agenda and all still hated each other, so when the new alliance made their move on Qin, they were easily defeated because of the internal conflict. However, in 311 BC, the king of Qin dies, and their prime minister also dies just 1 year later. The late king's son, Prince Wu, then became the next king of Qin. One day, 4 years after Wu became king, he visits the capital of Zhou. There he meets a powerlifter called Meng Yue, who motivates him to do some lifting. Wanting to show off his physical strength, the king proceeds to lift a heavy bronze cauldron in the royal palace. He successfully lifts up the cauldron, but ends up breaking his shin bones from the heavy weight, and that night blood came out of his eyes and he died soon after from his injuries. This now raised a problem. King Wu was pretty young when he died, and he didn't have a legitimate heir to take over the kingdom. And because the states followed a royal monarchy, not having a son to immediately take over usually led to struggles for the throne. Luckily, the previous king, Wu's father, had an illegitimate child with a low-ranking concubine 4 years after Wu was born. This illegitimate child went on to become King Zhao of Qin. But while they now had a king, the succession crisis left them much weaker. So when Qi asked Qin to form a horizontal alliance with Wei and Han, the Qin couldn't decline. While this was going on, Zhao was expanding up north, defeating the smaller state of Zhongshan in the northeast and the nomads in the northwest. The nomads were a group of barbarians that had been terrorizing states in the north for a long time, so Zhao's victory against them was unprecedented. Their success was mainly due to the reforms made by the Zhao ruler at the time, King Wuling. He introduced a revolutionary idea in ancient Chinese warfare, archery, while riding a horse. This idea was a style of combat that he found and took for himself during the years of dealing with the nomads. Zhao commanders at the time were also wearing robes to battle, but because they were ineffective in combat, the king ordered all his commanders to wear pants, boots, and fur clothing instead. King Wuling resigned in 299 BC, and his successor asked Qin to leave their current alliance and join them. Seeing that Zhao's military had become more powerful, Qin left their previous alliance with Qi to join the Zhao. Unsurprisingly though, their ex-allies weren't very happy about that. So they attacked Qin and they came frighteningly close to losing their capital city. The morale-boosted Qi alliance then invaded the other states, and with Qi leading the invasion, opposing forces were quickly overpowered by the alliance's sheer numbers. And following a series of victories by the alliance, Qi replaced Qin as a superpower in China. But since Qi's influence was far from Qin, the Qin were eventually able to repel the Han and Wei onslaught, also taking back the land they had lost previously. The two states were both doing pretty well at this point, so the rulers of both states declared themselves Di and then made an agreement to attack Zhao to celebrate. Things didn't go as planned, however, as the younger brother of Su Qin, the first guy to create a vertical alliance, persuaded the Qi that the war on Zhao would only benefit the Qin. Feeling betrayed, Qi once again formed a vertical alliance with the other states to attack Qin. Unable to take the full force of the alliance again, Qin agreed to return territory back to everyone else while the king also undeclared himself emperor. Qi was now the most powerful state in China and would rule for many years to come, creating a dynasty lasting for the next The kingdom of Yin was located north of Qi and was always a relatively weak state, so Qi never feared any possibility of an attack from them. Qi's success in recent years also scared the other states who were all afraid of becoming the next victim of a massive invasion, so Yin's sudden invasion surprised them. The invasion all started with the Yin general called Yue Yi, who grew worried that Qi was becoming way too powerful. Because of this, Yue Yi persuaded Qi's former allies and other states to form an alliance with himself as the commander-in-chief of the combined military force. He then led their massive army onto Qi soil, and within 6 years, the entire state of Qi was wiped out except for 2 cities. One of these cities was on the verge of being taken over as well, but one Qi general thought of a last-ditch effort to defend the city. His plan was to let loose a horde of oxen into the enemy camp so that they could chase them out while the enemy was in a state of panic. On one unsuspecting night, he strapped knives to the horns of the oxen, set their tails on fire, and sent them running into their camp. The enemy was terrified seeing this in the middle of the night and quickly scattered and retreated. The general had successfully defended the remaining cities, and Qi later recaptured much of their previous land under his command, though they were never able to reach the same level of power they once had. After wiping Qi off the map, Qin was back in power and the king was eager to make Qin great again, so they took a big chunk of Chu's western territory and their capital city along with it. Qin and Zhao now both had a strong military, and they wanted to duke it out to see whose was better. And finally, in 265 BC, they had a great war. Qin attacked the Han, who then asked the Zhao for help. Zhao responded by sending their general Lian Po, one of the greatest generals of this period, and Qin sent Wang He, another great general at the time. The Zhao general decided it was too risky to attack the Qin head-on, so he played attrition warfare, defending the city for 3 years waiting for a moment to strike. The king of Zhao, however, didn't like how nothing was happening, so he replaced him with a more aggressive general. And at the same time, Qin replaced Wang He with an even more aggressive general, Bai Qi, another notorious general at the time. The instant Zhao attacked, Bai Qi responded with the same aggression and easily defeated Zhao, taking many soldiers prisoner. Following the victory, Bai Qi wanted to keep pushing to Zhao's capital, but the remaining prisoners of war posed a threat because of their large numbers and could still fight back. Not taking any chances, Bai Qi ordered the 400,000 Zhao troops to be executed by live burial. This move would ultimately cripple the Zhao military for the remainder of the warring states, but in the end, Bai Qi never actually accomplished his goal and never made it to the Zhao capital since the king of Qin ordered him to withdraw before he could do so. Years later, in 256 BC, Qin conquered West Zhou, overthrowing the king of Zhou and taking the 9 cauldrons. The 9 cauldrons were a symbol of the mandate of heaven, and so this meant that Qin now had heaven's approval to rule China. But wait, Zhou still has the east. Before King Zhao of Qin could conquer East Zhou, he dies, ending a long 57-year reign. His son also dies just 3 days later, so his grandson becomes the next king. He would go on to finally conquer East Zhou, officially ending the longest dynasty in Chinese history. The new Qin king would only come to rule for 3 short years, passing away in 247 BC. His son, Yingzheng, would become the king to finally conquer the other states and create a unified China, and he would become known as Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. In the 17 years since Yingzheng became king, Qin was busy preparing for a great plan. Qin had owned a majority of the land in China, and their military forces were at their peak condition, boasting their massive army and capable generals. The king would use these conditions to carry out their grand plan, the plan to conquer the other states and unify China. And in 230 BC, Qin would make their first move. The first state to fall was Han. The state of Han was always relatively weak and only survived due to their status as a buffer state, which kept other states from directly invading each other. Because of this, states that tried to attack Han were usually countered by forces from other states in order to preserve the buffer state. And throughout the Warring States period, Han would receive support from the other states because of this special status. But eventually, Qin became too powerful and their final invasion on Han would lead to Han's conquest. The next to fall was Zhao. The Battle of Changping years earlier had severely crippled Zhao's military, while Qin's only became stronger. Zhao also couldn't receive any assistance from the other states, as they were either too weak or too afraid to face the powerful Qin. But one Zhao general would single-handedly keep them from collapsing. Qin led several invasions on Zhao with the goal of advancing their army, but all of them were repelled under the command of General Li Mu. During their first invasion in 233 BC, Qin had tried to capture Zhao's capital, but their advance was cut short by Li Mu here. A year later, Qin tried again, but was stopped once again by Li Mu nearby their previous battle. The Qin realized that they were repeatedly defeated by the same general, so they had to lock in. In 229 BC, Qin sent 4 generals, including Li Xin and their top general Wang Jian. While Qin didn't suffer a defeat like the previous times, they also weren't able to break past Li Mu's defense. So they resorted to trickier methods to get Li Mu out of the picture. They sent spies into Zhao to bribe court officials, and they spread treacherous rumors about the general, creating distrust between the king of Zhao and Li Mu. So the king eventually began to doubt Li Mu's loyalty and ordered him to be executed. This move was a blunder by Zhao, who without Li Mu was very quickly conquered by the Qin. But they still had this piece of land where the prince of Zhao had escaped. In 228 BC, Yin suspected that they were the next to be conquered, so a Yin official proposed to the king an alliance with Dai, Chu, Qi to combat Qin. The king didn't think the alliance would work, so he instead sent an assassin to kill Ying Zheng. And this assassin's name was Jin Ke. Jin Ke reached the royal palace disguised as an envoy from Yin, bringing with him a scroll depicting a map of an important Yin city and a head of a traitorous Qin general. As the king opened the scroll, Jin Ke grabbed the king's robe and took out a knife which he had hidden inside the scroll and attempted to stab him. The king managed to break free, but ripping his sleeve in the process, and he ran to a nearby pillar to escape the assassin's pursuit, where he and the assassin circled around for a while. None of the court officials present were able to stop Jin Ke as they were frozen in shock at what had happened and were also unarmed. Only the royal physician, seeing the king in danger, threw his medicine bag at the assassin, slowing him down enough for the king to reach for his sword and stab him. With the sword wound on his leg, Jin Ke could no longer pursue the king, and the assassination attempt had failed. Jin Ke spent his last moments taunting the king before palace guards arrived and executed him. Ying Zheng clearly didn't like this, so he ordered an invasion of Yin in 226 BC. However, Yin would not be defeated for another 4 years as Qin set their sights on Wei. Wei had lost many cities to Qin during their invasions a century earlier, including their capital. Wei's new capital was located near a river, with the city having drawbridges and moats surrounding it, giving a natural defense against invasions. This didn't faze the Qin general in command, Wang Bun, who came up with the idea to flood the capital by redirecting the flow of the nearby river. Once the capital was flooded, the Wei army could do little to resist, and the king of Wei quickly surrendered and Wei came under Qin's control. The state of Chu was now next on Qin's list. Chu had always been pretty powerful, so the king of Qin wanted to send their best general, Wang Jin, to lead the invasion. Wang Jin asked for 600,000 troops to attack the Chu, and another general, Li Xin, said that they would only need 200,000 troops to get the job done. The king of Qin, not wanting to give command of such a large number of soldiers to a general out of fear of rebellion, took Li Xin's offer instead. Wang Jin, who was getting old, went into retirement, and Li Xin became the commander of the Chu invasion. Unfortunately, Qin was defeated by Chu's counterattack with assistance from an influential Qin noble who was actually related to Chu's royal family, who betrayed Qin. Hearing of the defeat, the king of Qin personally visited Wang Jin to apologize and asked him to lead the army once again. And so Wang Jin took the 600,000 soldiers and marched into Chu, but he played it safe, training his troops to fight in Chu territory while waiting for the right moment to strike. After 1 year, the Chu army thought Qin had given up their invasion and let their guard down. The moment Wang Jin noticed, he launched an all-out offensive, defeating the Chu army and killing their general. Yin would also fall into Qin hands just 1 year later. And in the same year, the mini-state of Dai, led by Zhao's former prince, was also seized by the Qin army, ending Zhao for good. The state of Qi had been AFK throughout all of the Qin invasions of the other states. This was actually because the chancellor or prime minister of Qi was bribed by Qin to convince the king to not assist other states during their invasions. But by 221 BC, Qi was the only remaining state left in China that had not been conquered by Qin. At this point, they realized they were next, so they quickly mobilized their army to their western border to defend against the impending Qin army. However, Qin armies bypassed the western blockade by maneuvering through the north from where Yin previously was, and were able to directly march to the Qi capital. By the time the king of Qi realized, Qin was already in front of their capital city, and Qi agreed to peacefully surrender. And so, after centuries of brutal conflict, strategic alliances, and shifting power, the Warring States period came to a dramatic close. In 221 BC, the state of Qin, under the leadership of the ambitious and ruthless Ying Zheng, emerged victorious. With all rival states conquered, he declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. His reign marked the beginning of the Qin dynasty and the end of the fractured Zhou era. And although his empire was short-lived, Qin Shi Huang's unification of China led the foundation for a centralized imperial rule that would shape Chinese civilization throughout its future dynasties.